Hey everyone. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I haven't done one of these videos before, so I don't know how well my microphone picks up sound or anything like that. So I decided to do my first little tutorial on masking because a couple people asked, and I figured that was a pretty simple beginner thing to get started with. So I just have a couple pictures that I just went ahead and pulled up. This one's from Unsplash, so of course I wouldn't recommend using it on any kind of cover. This is just for practice. So the first thing I want to talk about is kind of picking out your pictures that you're going to use in your composites. I see a lot of times people just kind of pick what they like for backgrounds and pick what they like for models, and they can't quite figure out why it doesn't match or mesh well. And there are a couple reasons for that. So I pulled in an image of this girl right here, and one of the biggest things that you'll want to look at when you're trying to pick out a model for your background is the lighting. So in this image, it's just a sky, but it's kind of really softly lit. It looks like an overcast day. Whereas this girl on the beach is a very bright, sunny day. The lighting on her is very harsh. And what I mean by that is if you see our light source is coming from over here, you see this really sharp line of where the sunlight is hitting her, so where her bright spots are versus where her shadows are. So while we could get the colors to match and everything with this, it's still going to look just a little off because of that lighting. So I don't want to use that one. So we're going to delete that. So instead I went with this guy. This is from Pixabay, so again, we don't want to go using this in a professional cover. This is just for practice. I also create smart objects out of all my layers. If you see this little icon right here, that means that I've turned it into a smart object. Don't worry about that too much right now. I'll cover that in some other tutorial. So when I click this, it brings it up in a whole new window, basically. Let me do that real quick. So we've picked out our model, we've picked out our background, and now we want to cut this dude out and mask him so that he is on this background with no background of his own. And there are a lot of different ways you can do this. There's a lot of different tools. There's the magic wand, there's the lasso tool, there's creating a mask and just painting around it. There's the background eraser tool. The background eraser tool is really great if you have a solid background, like a solid white background in a studio setting, and the subject is dark enough that you can get a really clean edge when you use the background tool. I'll show you real quick just what it looks like. I'm going to create a second layer because I always keep my original layer untouched in case I mess something up. And I'm just going to create just a solid black layer and put it behind this. So as I cut this guy out, I can kind of see how it looks against a solid background without that checkered transparent background kind of thing. So the background eraser tool, the way that it works basically is you select something and it takes that sampling and erases anything with that color in it. So if I select right here, it starts to erase. And if you've got a pretty solid background color, it does a decent job. You'll see the color starts to change here, so it stops erasing as well. So I can always take another sample and keep going. So the problem with this is that this isn't a solid background. We've got a lot of like noise in the background, a lot of little artifacts going on, a lot of color gradients and variants. So for this image, I probably wouldn't use this. I mean, it's kind of up to you. You can always go up here and up your tolerance, which just means that it's a little less picky. But then sometimes you start cutting into the subject, and that's not what we want either. So you see how it's going into his face because those colors are a little too similar. So that's just one way to do it. But again, better for really solid backgrounds. So for this guy, I'm probably just going to use, well, first let's try, there's this handy little thing called the select subject. And sometimes this does a really, really good job and sometimes not so much, but it's always worth a try. We've got a pretty good contrast between the guy and the background, so maybe this will work. So that looks pretty good. There's a couple spots we could clean up, which I can do just by going in here to my polygon lasso tool. And if I hold down Shift, you'll see that little plus sign next to it. That means I can add to my selection. So I'm just gonna come in here and just kind of come in around this. It doesn't need to be perfect. I'm just doing this for practice to show you guys. So obviously you can be pickier than I am. Oops. Go up here to his hand. Because this is from Pixabay, the quality isn't as great as some of the other pictures I might choose. And then if you hold down Alt on a PC, you get that minus sign so I can subtract from my selection. I apologize, you probably hear the dogs in the background playing. I'm dog sitting. Again, I'm just doing this real quick. Another option for these images is the pen tool. That's what I use probably the most often, just because I can get smoother lines and better curves than the polygon lasso tool, which can be a little tricky with curves. Alright, so that looks pretty good. We've got see our little selection, marching ants everywhere. So in this instance, masking is, all it really is just as it says, you're masking out a part of the image. You're making it invisible, but it's still there. So you can always go back later and readjust it. It's better than just erasing stuff, because once you've erased it, it's gone. So if you were to accidentally erase something that later you were like, oh man, I could have used that, then you're kind of out of luck. So it's a really good non-destructive way to cut out your images. And all you have to do that is make your selection. If you come down here on your layers tool, on your layers toolbar, you've got this little circle cut out of a square, rectangle, whatever. And if you click that, everything that was outside of our selection is now gone. And there's this little part in here I could go in and select. and then I'm just hitting Alt. Oops. There you go. I'm just filling that with black, and then that takes it out. And if you were to click on your layer mask and hit Alt or hold down Alt on your keyboard and click, it brings up just a really black and white image of what your mask looks like. Everything in white is what's visible. Everything that's in black is invisible. You could invert that if you wanted to. I'm just hitting Control I, and suddenly our sky is visible, but our guy is gone. Step back. And I kind of covered this in another video where you get like this little fringe all around here. So I'll cover that again really briefly and probably speed this up in post editing how I fix that. I'm going to go down here and create just a new layer, and it'll create it over the top. I'm going to clip that layer to my dude layer, and a clipping mask basically, the title's kind of misleading, I guess. A clipping mask is where you clip something to the layer below it so that it only shows up on that layer. So I can do that by holding down Alt on my PC keyboard, and you see how the icon changes there to that little square with the arrow. Click that, and now you'll see that this is clipped to this layer. So anything that I paint is only going to be on this dude, right? Whoops. So now I'm going to go over here to my clone stamp tool. I'm going to click that and make sure it's the clone stamp, not the pattern stamp. Make my brush way smaller. And so for this, I almost always have my flow on my brushes set down pretty low, usually like between 20 and 40%, maybe sometimes even lower depending on what I'm doing. And my opacity, I just kind of play with it. Some stuff is different. But flow is always more important to me than opacity. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to sample something close to where I want to start. So, and you do that by holding down Alt, the cursor will change, and just click in there. And then I'm going to come out here to the edge, and I'm going to start painting in. I'm just doing this with a mouse, by the way. I don't have my tablet with me. And you'll start to see that little fringe getting filled in. And then resample every now and again, just to make sure that you're staying pretty close to what you want. Okay, so I went through and I cleaned all that up. I usually also set this to darken, just because sometimes normal I cover up some details I didn't want, and really all I want is that fringe covered. So let's see, the difference is kind of minimal. But if we turn that layer off, you see how all that fringe is gone. I didn't spend a whole lot of time on his hair because I'm not going to be using this for anything important. So normally I would go in and soften that up a lot and paint in some individual hairs using some hair brushes and some really tiny brushes just to make it look really clean and natural and not just like it's kind of cut out. That's another issue that I see a lot of people have with cutting out models, is the hair just looks really flat and not real. So I'm going to disable this black layer, and then you'll see the transparency there. And again, this is a smart object, so I'm just saving it. And then I come back in here, and there's our dude floating in our sky. I can make them a little bit bigger. That's the nice thing about smart objects, and I'll cover it more in a different video, is it maintains the original resolution of the smart object itself. Normally if you paste something in there and you shrink it down really, really tiny, like I'll show you. Here's this. If I make our dude really small, and then I decide, you know what, no, I want to make him bigger, suddenly he's all blurry because we shrunk him down in Photoshop to save space, basically, has compressed him, and we lose a lot of quality. So I don't like that. And so using a smart object, you know, I can shrink him down as small as I want and then make him big again, and that quality is still there. So that's what I want. So there's our first lesson in masking. I'll probably use the same image to do the next video on color grading and color matching to make our guy look like he fits in with the background, because right now he really kind of doesn't. He's in a lot of pretty warm colors and could definitely use a little bit of adjustment. So I hope that explains it a little bit and shows a little bit of my process. If I missed something or you want to see something a little more in depth, just let me know. Talk to you guys later.